My roommate slept with my boyfriend and I got her kicked out of college, but the real story isn't what you think it is. The discovery came like a punch to the chest on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was rushing to grab my psychology textbook from my dorm room when I heard it through the thin walls, her breathless laughter mixing with a voice I knew better than my own heartbeat. My hand froze on the doorknob and suddenly the hallway felt like it was tilting sideways. That wasn't possible. Jake was supposed to be in his economics class across campus. I checked my phone with trembling fingers. 10:47 a.m. Tuesday. He had Econ 301 every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30. I knew his schedule by heart because I'd memorized it during our 8 months together, the way you memorize the things that matter. But there it was again. His voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from Meredith's side of our shared room. The sound of shifting sheets. A soft thud that might have been clothes hitting the floor. My whole body went cold, then hot, then cold again. The textbook slipped from my numb fingers and hit the linoleum with a sharp crack that echoed down the empty hallway. I stood there staring at the door like it might explain everything, like it might tell me I was losing my mind. But I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing everything else. The rational part of my brain tried to construct alternative explanations. Maybe Jake had come by to return something to Meredith. Maybe they were just talking about something urgent. Maybe I was hearing things wrong because I'd been stressed about midterms and hadn't been sleeping well. Except I knew Jake's laugh. I knew the way he sounded when he was happy, when he was nervous, when he was doing things that made him breathless and careless about volume control. I pressed my ear to the door, hating myself for it but unable to stop. The sounds were clearer now, unmistakable and devastating. The rhythmic creaking of Meredith's bed. Her voice, breathy and urgent, saying his name in a way that made my stomach twist into knots. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, and I felt like I was floating somewhere above my own body, watching this happen to someone else. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be my boyfriend and my roommate in the room I'd been sharing for 3 months. But it was. I backed away from the door on unsteady legs, my psychology textbook forgotten on the floor. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips behind my eyes. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. I stumbled toward the bathroom at the end of the hall, my vision blurring at the edges. The sounds followed me. Her voice, his voice, the terrible soundtrack of my world falling apart. I locked the bathroom door behind me and slid down against it, my knees pulled up to my chest. The tile floor was cold against my back, and I focused on that sensation because it was the only thing that felt real. Everything else was dissolving, reshaping itself into something I didn't recognize. Jake, who'd held my hand through my grandmother's funeral last month. Jake, who'd brought me soup when I had the flu and stayed up all night watching movies with me. Jake, who'd whispered that he loved me just 3 days ago. And Meredith, sweet, bubbly Meredith, who'd helped me pick out the dress for my date with Jake 2 weeks ago. Meredith, who'd listened to me worry about whether Jake really liked me, who'd assured me that of course he did, anyone could see how crazy he was about me. Meredith, who'd borrowed my favorite sweater last week and returned it with a coffee stain she'd tried to hide. I sat there on the bathroom floor, trying to make sense of it. How long had this been happening? How many times had I left for class while Jake was still in our room with her? How many conversations had I had with both of them, completely oblivious to what was happening behind my back? The worst part was how normal everything had seemed. Just last night, the 3 of us had ordered pizza and watched Netflix together. Jake had sat next to me on my bed, his arm around my shoulders, while Meredith curled up on her own bed with a bowl of popcorn. We'd laughed at the same jokes, argued about what to watch next, shared the last piece of pizza. Had they been looking at each other when I wasn't paying attention? Had they been planning this? I thought about every interaction I'd had with them recently, searching for signs I'd missed. Jake had been a little distant lately, but I'd attributed it to stress about his upcoming organic chemistry exam. Meredith had been spending more time in the room, but I'd thought she was just being more social. She'd asked about my schedule more often, but I'd figured she was trying to be a better roommate. God, I was such an idiot. The bathroom door rattled as someone tried the handle, and I held my breath until their footsteps faded away. I couldn't stay here forever, but I also couldn't face going back to my room. Not yet. Not while they were still there. I pulled out my phone and stared at Jake's contact photo, a silly selfie we'd taken at the campus coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation. He was making bunny ears behind my head, and I was laughing so hard my eyes were completely closed. We'd looked so happy, so carefree, so in love. Had any of it been real? Or had I just been a convenient placeholder while he waited for something better to come along? And why Meredith? What did she have that I didn't? She was prettier, sure, with her perfect blonde hair and her effortless style. She was more outgoing, more confident, more everything that I wasn't. But she was also supposed to be my friend. I scrolled through my recent messages with Jake, looking for clues. 3 days ago, can't wait to see you tonight. Love you. 2 days ago, good luck on your psych test. You're going to kill it. Yesterday, movie night with you and Meredith sounds perfect. See you at 7. There was nothing. No signs of guilt, no hints of distance, no indication that he was about to completely destroy my life. He'd been texting me normally, telling me he loved me, making plans with me, all while he was planning to do this with my roommate. The sounds from my room had stopped, and I heard the soft click of the door opening, footsteps in the hallway, 2 sets moving quietly. I pressed my ear to the bathroom door and heard Jake's voice, low and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. Then Meredith's voice, equally quiet, followed by the sound of the stairwell door opening and closing. I waited another 10 minutes before I had the courage to leave the bathroom. The hallway was empty, and my psychology textbook was still lying on the floor where I'd dropped it. I picked it up with shaking hands and unlocked my door. The room looked exactly the same as I'd left it that morning, except for the rumpled sheets on Meredith's bed and the faint smell of Jake's cologne hanging in the air. My side of the room was untouched, my neat desk, my perfectly made bed, my photos of Jake and me taped to the wall above my pillow. I sat on my bed and stared at those photos. Jake and me at the campus fall festival. Jake and me at his fraternity formal. Jake and me at the beach during spring break, his arm around my waist, both of us squinting into the sun. In every single photo, we looked happy. In love. Like we had a future together. I reached up and pulled down the photo from the fall festival, studying it closely. Jake was looking at the camera, but I was looking at him, my face soft with adoration. I remembered that moment. He'd just said something funny, and I'd been thinking about how lucky I was to have found him. How perfect we were together. The photo fluttered to the floor, and I didn't pick it up. I must have sat there for hours, staring at nothing, trying to process what had happened. Eventually, I heard Meredith's key in the lock, and my entire body tensed. She pushed the door open tentatively, as if she sensed something was wrong. She looked exactly the same as always, blonde hair in a messy bun, oversized sweater, bright smile, but now I could see things I'd missed before. The way she avoided direct eye contact, the slight flush in her cheeks, the way her fingers fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater. I watched her carefully, waiting for her to say something, to give herself away. But she just tossed her backpack onto her bed and started chatting about her morning classes like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just been in this room with my boyfriend an hour ago. Her casual tone felt like another betrayal, somehow worse than the original offense. She was going to pretend nothing had happened. She was going to make me feel crazy for suspecting anything. But I wasn't crazy. I knew what I'd heard. I responded to her chatter with non-committal sounds, not trusting myself to speak. She seemed to take my quietness as normal, I'd always been the less talkative one, and continued unpacking her things. I watched her strip the sheets from her bed and stuff them into her laundry bag, and the casual way she did it made my chest tight with rage. She was erasing the evidence. Cleaning up like this was just another mess to deal with, not the complete destruction of my relationship and my trust. That night, Jake texted me asking if I wanted to grab dinner. I stared at the message for a long time, imagining his face when he sent it. Was he thinking about what he'd done with Meredith? Was he feeling guilty? Or was he just compartmentalizing, treating me like a separate part of his life that didn't need to know about the other parts? I texted back that I wasn't feeling well, which was true enough. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, then backed over for good measure. He sent back a concerned message with heart emojis, asking if I needed anything, and I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Meredith went to bed early that night, claiming she had a headache. I lay awake in the darkness, listening to her breathing, wondering if she was really asleep or if she was lying there thinking about Jake, thinking about what they'd done in the bed just a few feet away from mine. I thought about confronting them. I imagined the scene, bursting into wherever they were meeting, demanding explanations, crying, screaming, making them feel as terrible as I felt. But I also knew that confronting them would only give them a chance to make excuses, to minimize what they'd done, to make me feel like I was overreacting. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to be strategic. As the hours passed and my initial shock faded into something colder and more focused, I started to think about what I really wanted. An apology wouldn't fix this. Explanations wouldn't change what had happened. Jake and I were over, that much was clear. But Meredith was a different story. She was supposed to be my friend. She was supposed to be someone I could trust, someone who had my back. Instead, she'd stabbed me in it, and then she'd had the audacity to come back to our room and act like nothing had happened. That couldn't go unpunished. I thought about what I knew about Meredith, what mattered to her most. She was pre-med, obsessed with getting into the best medical schools. She'd talked endlessly about her 4.0 GPA, her volunteer work at the hospital, her research position with Dr. Martinez in the biology department. She was the kind of person who color-coded her study schedule and had her entire 4-year plan mapped out in excruciating detail. She was also, I realized, the kind of person who would do anything to protect her perfect image, including sleep with her roommate's boyfriend and then act like it never happened. But it had happened, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. While Meredith was in the shower, I went through her things, not frantically, not desperately, but methodically. I was looking for something specific, though I wasn't sure what until I found it. Her planner. The same color-coded, obsessively detailed planner she'd shown me proudly during our first week as roommates. The planner that contained every aspect of her carefully controlled life. I flipped through it, noting her study schedules, her volunteer shifts, her research meetings. Everything was planned out weeks in advance, with different colored pens for different types of activities. It was the planner of someone who couldn't afford to have anything go wrong. And then I found what I was looking for, her meeting with Dr. Martinez next week. The research position that was so important to her medical school applications. The position she'd worked so hard to get, and that she'd bragged about constantly. I also found something else. Jake's initials scattered throughout the margins of recent pages, little hearts and doodles that she'd tried to hide among her other notes. Evidence that this wasn't just a one-time thing. This had been going on for a while. The shower turned off, and I quickly put the planner back where I'd found it. By the time Meredith emerged from the bathroom, I was sitting at my desk, apparently studying for my upcoming biology exam. She asked me about my plans for the day, and I told her I was going to spend most of it in the library. She seemed relieved, and I wondered if she was planning to meet Jake again. The thought made my stomach twist, but I pushed it aside. I had work to do. At the library, I found a quiet corner and pulled out my laptop. I needed to research Dr. Martinez to understand his research, his standards, his expectations. I needed to understand exactly what Meredith stood to lose. Dr. Martinez was a well-respected researcher in cellular biology, known for his rigorous standards and his intolerance for anything that might compromise the integrity of his work. He'd been featured in several articles about research ethics, and he served on the university's Academic Integrity Committee. Perfect. I spent the next several hours crafting my plan. It had to be subtle, believable, and devastating. It had to look like Meredith had brought it on herself, not like I was orchestrating her downfall. I thought about the university's honor code, which all students had to sign at the beginning of each semester. The code that specifically prohibited not just cheating, but also any behavior that might compromise the integrity of the academic community. The code that was taken very seriously by the administration, and that could result in suspension or expulsion. I thought about Meredith's research position, which required her to handle sensitive data and to work with expensive equipment, a position that required absolute trust between the student and the supervising professor, and I thought about how to destroy that trust without leaving any fingerprints. The plan started to take shape in my mind, and for the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt something other than pain. I felt powerful. I felt like I was taking back control of my life, of my story. Jake had chosen Meredith over me. Fine. But Meredith was going to learn that actions have consequences, and that betraying someone's trust comes with a price. I just had to be patient. Over the next few days, I watched and waited. I learned Jake and Meredith's patterns, their secret signals, their meeting times. They were careful, but not careful enough. They thought I was oblivious, and they used that assumption to their advantage. Jake would text me that he was going to study with his fraternity brothers, and then I'd see him slipping into the building where Meredith had her research lab. Meredith would tell me she was working late at the hospital, and then I'd spot her across campus with Jake, both of them trying to look casual as they found secluded spots to talk. They were terrible at hiding it, actually. If I hadn't been so trusting, so willing to believe their excuses, I would have figured it out weeks ago. But their carelessness was going to be their downfall. At least Meredith's downfall. I started documenting everything. Not in an obvious way, I wasn't taking photos or keeping a journal. But I was paying attention to details, memorizing times and locations, noting inconsistencies in their stories. I was building a case piece by piece. And then I got the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Meredith had been working on a research project involving cell cultures, something that required precise timing and sterile conditions. She'd been stressed about it for weeks, complaining about how difficult it was to maintain the cultures and how much time she had to spend in the lab. She'd also been more distracted than usual, spending more time texting and less time actually studying. Her color-coded planner had become chaotic, with crossed-out appointments and hastily scribbled notes. She was losing control of her perfectly organized life, and she didn't even realize it. One afternoon, she rushed out of the room to meet Jake, claiming she had to run to the bookstore before it closed. She was so flustered that she left her research notebook open on her desk, and I saw something that made my heart race. She'd been falsifying data, not in a major way, just small adjustments to make her results look cleaner, more consistent. The kind of thing that a desperate student might do if they were running out of time and needed to show progress to their supervising professor. The kind of thing that would destroy her academic career if it came to light. I stared at the notebook, my mind racing. This was it. This was the ammunition I needed. But I had to be smart about how I used it. I couldn't just report her directly. That would be too obvious, too traceable back to me. I needed to find a way to make the discovery look natural, inevitable. I thought about Dr. Martinez's reputation for thoroughness, his habit of spot-checking his students' work. What if he happened to notice inconsistencies in Meredith's data? What if he started asking questions about her methodology, her lab practices, her time management? I began to formulate a plan that would make him look more closely at her work without involving me directly. It would take time, and it would require careful execution, but it was possible. The next week, I volunteered to help with the department's undergraduate research showcase. It was a chance for students to present their work to faculty and fellow students, and participation was highly encouraged for anyone hoping to get into graduate school. Meredith had signed up to present her research, of course. It was another opportunity to impress Dr. Martinez and to add to her already impressive resume, but it was also an opportunity for me to make sure her work got the scrutiny it deserved. I spent hours preparing, learning everything I could about her research area, understanding the techniques she was using, familiarizing myself with the standards for data collection and analysis. I wasn't going to sabotage her presentation directly. I was going to make sure the right people asked the right questions. The night before the showcase, I happened to mention to Dr. Martinez that I'd been curious about cellular biology research and wondered if he had any recommendations for papers to read. He was happy to talk about his work, and I listened carefully as he explained the importance of rigorous methodology and careful data analysis. I asked innocent questions about common mistakes that undergraduate researchers made, about red flags that might indicate problems with data quality. He was generous with his knowledge, clearly pleased to have a student showing genuine interest in the field. By the end of our conversation, I was confident that he would know what to look for when evaluating Meredith's work. The day of the showcase arrived, and I made sure to attend Meredith's presentation. She looked nervous but confident, dressed in her best professional outfit, her hair perfectly styled. She'd clearly spent a lot of time preparing, and under normal circumstances, I might have been proud of her. But these weren't normal circumstances. Her presentation went well initially. She explained her hypothesis clearly, described her methodology competently, and showed her results with apparent confidence. But I could see the subtle signs of nervousness, the way she rushed through certain sections, the way she avoided making eye contact with Dr. Martinez during specific parts of her presentation. When she finished, the audience applauded politely. Dr. Martinez asked a few general questions, which she answered adequately. I thought for a moment that my plan had failed, that she was going to get away with it. But then Dr. Martinez asked to see her raw data. I watched Meredith's face go pale. She stammered something about having it back in the lab, about being happy to show it to him later, but Dr. Martinez was persistent, mentioning that he liked to see the full picture when evaluating undergraduate research. Other faculty members nodded in agreement, and suddenly Meredith was cornered. She promised to compile everything and send it to Dr. Martinez by the end of the week, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew she was in trouble. Over the next few days, I watched her unravel. She spent long hours in the lab, clearly trying to reconstruct legitimate data to replace what she'd falsified. She was constantly stressed, snapping at me over minor things, forgetting to eat, staying up until all hours of the night. Jake noticed her distraction too. I saw him trying to talk to her after one of their secret meetings, saw her pushing him away with sharp gestures. The strain was affecting their relationship, and I felt a petty satisfaction at the thought that their betrayal was causing them both misery. But I wasn't done yet. I knew that Dr. Martinez was expecting Meredith's data by Friday. I also knew that she was struggling to produce anything that would withstand scrutiny. She'd dug herself into a hole, and now she was frantically trying to dig herself out. On Thursday night, I made an anonymous tip to the university's academic integrity office. I didn't provide specific details. I just expressed concern about potential irregularities in undergraduate research in the biology department. I mentioned that I'd heard rumors about students feeling pressured to produce results and suggested that they might want to look into it. It was vague enough to avoid suspicion, but specific enough to prompt an investigation. Friday morning, Meredith was called into a meeting with Dr. Martinez and the department chair. She left the room looking confident, but she returned an hour later looking like she'd seen a ghost. She didn't say anything to me about the meeting, but I could see the devastation in her eyes. She sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen, occasionally wiping away tears she thought I couldn't see. That evening, Jake came by the room. I was studying at my desk, and I listened as he and Meredith talked in hushed voices. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught enough to understand that she was in serious trouble. The investigation had found evidence of data manipulation. Dr. Martinez had terminated her research position immediately. The Academic Integrity Office was reviewing her case, and there was a possibility of suspension or expulsion. Her perfect academic record was ruined. Her medical school applications were in jeopardy. Her entire future was crumbling. I should have felt satisfied. This was exactly what I'd wanted: consequences for her betrayal, punishment for her lies. But as I listened to her quiet sobs, I felt something more complicated. Relief, yes. Vindication, certainly. But also something that might have been regret. I pushed that feeling aside. She'd brought this on herself. She'd chosen to betray me, chosen to falsify data, chosen to prioritize her relationship with Jake over her integrity and her friendship with me. I'd just helped the truth come to light. The next few days were tense. Meredith barely spoke to me, and when she did, her voice was flat and emotionless. She spent most of her time sleeping or staring at her laptop screen, occasionally making phone calls to her parents or her advisor. Jake stopped coming by the room. Whether that was because he felt guilty or because Meredith had pushed him away, I didn't know. But their secret meetings stopped, and I found myself wondering if their relationship would survive the pressure of what was happening. Part of me hoped it wouldn't. Part of me wanted them both to suffer the consequences of their choices. But mostly, I just wanted to move on. The Academic Integrity Committee scheduled a hearing for the following week. Meredith would have a chance to defend herself, to explain what had happened, to potentially avoid the worst consequences. I knew she was preparing frantically, trying to construct a defense that might save her academic career. She'd hired a lawyer, which seemed excessive but probably wise given the circumstances. The night before the hearing, she finally spoke to me directly. I was getting ready for bed when she turned away from her laptop and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. She asked me if I thought she was a terrible person. The question caught me off guard. I'd been expecting anger, accusations, maybe even a confession, but not this vulnerable, broken question. I told her I didn't know how to answer that. She nodded like she'd expected that response. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. She said she knew she'd made mistakes, that she'd compromised her values and hurt people she cared about. She said she didn't know how to fix it, but she was going to try. She didn't mention Jake. She didn't mention our relationship, but I could see in her eyes that she knew I knew. I wanted to say something cruel, something that would make her feel as terrible as she'd made me feel. But looking at her broken expression, I found I couldn't. I told her I hoped she figured it out. The hearing was held in the administration building, and I made sure to be nearby when Meredith emerged. She looked smaller somehow, defeated in a way that went beyond academic consequences. She saw me waiting and walked over slowly. For a moment we stood there in the hallway, two people who'd once been friends, now separated by betrayal and revenge. She told me she'd been suspended for the rest of the semester. She could reapply for readmission in the fall, but her research position was gone permanently. Her medical school applications would have to be delayed by at least a year. I felt that complicated mix of emotions again, satisfaction at the justice of it, but also something that might have been pity. She asked me if I was happy now. I told her I didn't know. She nodded, then said she was sorry. Not just for the research misconduct, but for everything. For betraying my trust, for lying to me, for making choices that hurt people she cared about. I wanted to ask her about Jake, about how long it had been going on, about whether she'd ever actually been my friend. But I found I didn't want to know the answers. She said she was moving back home for the rest of the semester, that she'd already arranged for someone else to take over her half of the room. She'd be gone by the end of the week. I watched her walk away, carrying a box of her things from the Academic Integrity Office. She looked fragile, broken, like a different person from the confident pre-med student I'd roomed with for 3 months. I should have felt triumphant. My plan had worked perfectly. Meredith had faced consequences for her betrayal, and I'd managed to orchestrate it without getting my hands dirty. But as I stood there in the empty hallway, I mostly just felt tired. Jake texted me that evening. He said he'd heard about what happened to Meredith, and he wanted to talk. He said there were things he needed to explain, mistakes he needed to apologize for. I stared at his message for a long time, remembering how his texts used to make me smile. Now they just made me feel hollow. I texted back that there was nothing to explain. I told him I knew about him and Meredith and that we were done. He called immediately, but I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, then sent a series of increasingly desperate texts. He said it wasn't what I thought, that he could explain everything, that he loved me and wanted to work things out. I deleted the messages without reading them all. Some explanations come too late to matter. Meredith moved out 3 days later. I helped her carry boxes to her car, not because I felt obligated to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. We didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't entirely hostile. As she was loading the last box into her trunk, she turned to me one final time. She said she hoped I'd be happy, that I'd find someone who deserved me. She said she was sorry for everything, and that she hoped someday she could be the kind of person who wouldn't make the same mistakes. I told her I hoped so too. I watched her drive away, and then I went back to my room now, not our room, and sat on my bed in the quiet space. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. It wasn't the triumphant satisfaction I'd expected. It wasn't the bitter vindication I'd thought I wanted. It was something quieter, more complicated. I'd gotten my revenge. Meredith had faced consequences for her betrayal, and those consequences were severe and lasting. Her academic career was derailed, her perfect image was shattered, and her future was uncertain. But I'd also lost something in the process. I'd lost my trust in people, my willingness to believe the best of others. I'd learned that I was capable of cold calculation, of patient manipulation, of orchestrating someone's downfall without feeling the full weight of it until it was over. I wasn't sure if that made me stronger or if it made me smaller. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking about the choices we'd all made. Meredith had chosen to betray me and to falsify her data. Jake had chosen to cheat on me and to lie about it. I had chosen to seek revenge rather than confrontation, to destroy rather than to heal. None of us had chosen the easy path. None of us had chosen to be better than our worst impulses. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the real lesson wasn't about justice or revenge or consequences. Maybe it was about the fact that people are complicated, that trust is fragile, and that sometimes the things we do to protect ourselves end up changing us in ways we didn't expect. I never heard from Meredith again. I heard through mutual friends that she'd transferred to a different university, that she'd changed her major from pre-med to something else. I heard that she was doing well, that she seemed happier, that she'd learned from her mistakes. I hoped that was true. Jake tried to contact me a few more times, but I never responded. Eventually, he stopped trying. I saw him around campus occasionally, usually with other girls, and I felt nothing more than a distant curiosity about the person I'd once thought I loved. I got a new roommate the following semester, a quiet girl named Sarah who was studying engineering. We got along well, but I was more cautious about friendship now, more careful about trust. I'd learned that people were capable of surprising you, both in the ways they could hurt you and in the ways they could disappoint themselves. But I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, more capable of surviving betrayal than I'd imagined. I'd learned that I could be strategic, that I could be patient, that I could be ruthless when necessary. I wasn't sure if those were good things to learn about myself, but they were true things. Looking back now, I don't regret what I did. Meredith made choices that had consequences, and I simply helped those consequences catch up with her. She'd falsified data, betrayed a friend, and compromised her academic integrity. The fact that I'd helped bring those actions to light didn't make them less worthy of punishment, but I also don't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Revenge, I learned, is a dish best served cold, but it's also a dish that leaves you feeling strangely empty once you've finished eating it. My roommate slept with my boyfriend, and I got her kicked out of college. But the real story isn't about the sleeping or the kicking out. It's about the choices we make when we're hurt, the lengths we'll go to protect ourselves, and the prices we're willing to pay for justice. Sometimes the price is higher than we expect. Sometimes the victory is smaller than we hoped. But sometimes that's enough.